Okay, so for this week, now that we've seen the movie, we're going to get into some content and some issues surrounding Just Mercy. So for Tuesday, we'll start some new vocabulary and talk about some articles, which I'll go over in just a second. And Wednesday, A-Day students will read the epigraph and the introduction together. And then B-Day students, when you come in, you will be ready to take the epigraph and introduction quiz. So throughout Just Mercy, just to be clear, any day that a quiz is scheduled for, that's something that will take, at the beginning of class. So you should be prepared for that quiz on that day. So you should come in on Thursday having read the epigraph and introduction. And then B-Day students, we will read the first chapter together on Friday. So we will do some reading together, but obviously, given the nature of our schedule and everything, there will be some times where you guys will have to read individually outside of class. So for A-Day students, you guys need to be ready to take the Chapter 1 quiz Monday at the beginning of class. So you will get the benefit of reading the epigraph and introduction together, but then you'll be responsible for the next chapter. And we'll try and kind of alternate like that, where, each week I'll read at least one chapter with you so that you're not doing it all on your own. Okay, so the rest of this video will be me going over the stuff from Tuesday. So for A-Day students, you can probably pretty much check out because I'll be doing this with you in class on Tuesday. But B-Day students, if you want to hear me talk about these things, then just hang in there. All right, so looking at vocabulary 6. First word, crone. A crone is a term for a withered old woman. It's a very negative connotation, this word, so definitely don't use it to describe your loved ones. Second word, crux, is actually a really common word in rock climbing. But in general, it describes any sort of critical or crucial point that you would encounter in a quest or mission or something you are trying to do. So for you guys, the crux of this course will be taking the AP exam. The third one, schism, is a split or division. So this can be literal physical, schism in the ground that divides the sidewalk, or it could be more emotional, an emotional split or division from someone or something. The fourth one, dauntless, describes someone who is brave, courageous, fearless, charging into danger to save others, perhaps. The fifth one is pronounced chagrin. So I don't want to hear anyone say chagrin or anything like that. That's a common mispronunciation. If you did, you might be feeling some embarrassment. So just note that this is a noun, so it's not to embarrass or embarrassing, but it is the feeling of embarrassment. The sixth one, adulation, again, a noun, describing the act of praise. So giving adulation to someone or something would be that, how you would use that in a sentence. The seventh one, technically 2 words, but used as one, a cappella, describes singing without instruments. So a song can be sung a cappella. There are certain a cappella groups, pentatonics, things like that. So, the eighth one, tribulation, another noun, is the act of suffering. So experiencing trials and tribulations can be a difficult thing, and certainly 2020 has been full of tribulation. The ninth one, compunction, another thing that we have probably experienced during this year, regret. So looking back on a situation, the feeling of, God, I wish I didn't do that. That would be the feeling of regret. And the 10th one, antipathy, is a strong dislike for someone or something. So the prefix anti, always indicates being against something. Right, so that's your vocabulary. The other things that 8A group will talk about on Monday. Obviously, Just Mercy establishes a more recent kind of challenge to the idea that our country has left behind it the ways of racism and prejudice. And, even more recently in 2020, that, idea has been challenged once again. So is this a country where people truly are treated equally and where there is not any sort of discrimination, or is this a country that's still working on that and still getting better and still learning and still evolving? So speaking of evolving, this article came out back in June, obviously during a rather tumultuous time in the wake of the George Floyd shooting and the beginning of a lot of protests and things like that, where a woman actually asked the dictionary to update its definition of racism and how we perceive what it means to be racist. So the word itself is a complicated one, and to call someone racist in our society, I mean, it has extraordinarily negative connotations. It's right up there with like being a pedophile. If you call someone a racist, that's like the worst thing that you can say to them. And people go to great lengths to try and prove and try to insist that they are free of racial discrimination. So there's a woman in Missouri, and she is responsible for getting the definition of racism, what it means to be racist, updated. So, Kennedy Mitchum wasn't expecting much when she emailed Merriam-Webster last month, but she wanted to let the dictionary publisher know that she thought its definition of the word racism was inadequate. So she was surprised when the editor responded, and even more surprised that the company agreed to update the entry. Mitchum has gotten into a lot of conversations about racism and injustice where people have pointed to the dictionary to prove that they are not racist. It's happened a lot more lately as the world reacts to the death of George Floyd while in the custody of 4 Minneapolis police officers. The 22-year-old Mitchum recently graduated from Drake University and lives in Florissant, Missouri, just a few miles away from Ferguson, where protest over the 2014 police shooting of Michael Brown helped solidify the Black Lives Matter movement. I kept having to tell them that definition is not representative of what is actually happening in the world, she told CNN. The way that racism occurs in real life is not just prejudice, it's the systemic racism that is happening for a lot of Black Americans. Merriam-Webster's first definition of racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Mitchum said many people she's talked to use that to dismiss her concerns about racism and overlook broader issues of racial inequality because they don't personally feel that way about people of color. Mitchum said she sent her email on a Thursday night and got a reply from editor Alex Chambers the next morning. After a few emails, Chambers agreed that the entry should be updated and said a new definition is being drafted. This revision would not have been made without your persistence in contacting us about this problem, Chambers said in the email, which was provided to CNN. We sincerely thank you for repeatedly writing in and apologize for the harm and offense we have caused in failing to address this issue sooner. Peter Sokolowski, an editor-at-large at Merriam-Webster, told CNN that their entry also defines racism as a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles, and a political or social system founded on racism, which would cover systematic racism and oppression. I think we can express this more clearly to bring the idea of an asymmetrical power structure into the language of this definition, but it's there. He said that dictionary definitions have traditionally been short because they had to fit so many words into their print editions. That's no longer the case since so many people use the dictionary online. Sokolowski said they update the dictionary 2 or 3 times a year to keep it as up-to-date as possible. He said the new language will probably be ready for the next update. The mission for Noah Webster himself, back in his first dictionary in 1806, was to essentially present the current active vocabulary of American English, and that's still our mission today, Sokolowski said. Mitchum said she hopes the vocabulary change helps people have more productive conversations about race. She said she appreciated them taking her concerns seriously and talking through the issue. I was super happy because I really felt that was a step in a good direction for a lot of positive change, for a lot of different positive conversations that can really help change the world and help change how people view things, she said. So that's one, concept that Just Mercy introduces, and that is becoming particularly relevant in our society is, how do we define racism? Because the old way that we used to see it, which was, people who were blatantly, overtly racist, who used racial slurs and, actively and openly discriminated against people of color, it's not as prevalent in our society. So the other ways that, people of color see discrimination, so in this entry, addressing systemic racism, racism that is kind of built into the system, where, obviously a system can't have thoughts or feelings, but can it be unfairly prejudiced against certain groups of people because of how it was set up in the first place? So Merriam-Webster seems to think that that deserves some consideration. You can decide for yourself, though. So, the next article, I have a rather attention-getting title. The other idea that Just Mercy and many other kind of anti-racist literature introduces is the idea that in individuals, rather than in a system, racism might not look the way that we think it would. It's not just the overt conscious choices that we're making, but sometimes the unconscious prejudices that we might inadvertently hold about, a group or a type of people. So science says that babies as young as 6 months old can actually be biased against different races. Now, obviously, they did not interview these 6 months old babies. Usually, 6 month old babies can't speak. So I thought it would be interesting to introduce, how they are kind of measuring this bias, and to kind of talk about like the idea of, is bias, unconscious bias, is it acceptable to kind of refer to that under the umbrella of racism? Are we all a little bit racist? Or should we reserve this unconscious bias? Should we find a different term for that because racism is such a loaded, charged, negative term? How do we navigate that? Words matter, right? The English teacher says words matter. So anyways, let's refer to it as bias for now. So this study about babies as young as 6 months showing signs of bias. So in 2017, how young does racism start? New research suggests you might see signs in your 6 to 9 month old baby. The research from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education shows infants of this age are biased in favor of people of their own race and against those of other races based on 2 studies. Now let's pause for a moment before diving into the science. No one is suggesting we are all accidentally raising baby bigots. Everyone has some amount of internalized views on race, no matter the goodness of our intentions. But this new research could help us cut off racism at its first inkling in a baby's constantly learning brain. For grown-ups, unconscious racial bias can be found in almost all of our social interactions, from healthcare to commerce, employment, politics, and dating, study lead author Kang Lee, PhD, said in a press release. If we can pinpoint the starting point of racial bias, which we may have done here, we can start to find ways to prevent racial biases from happening. Generally, of the people babies interact with, about 90% are the same race. The babies in these studies also had little to no exposure to people of different colors. The first study paired happy music and sad music with photos of people, and researchers found that 9-month-olds associated the happy music with photos of their own race and sad music with photos of other races. In the second study, babies watched videos where same-race adults and other race adults demonstrated a direction to look. The 6 to 8-month-olds were more likely to follow the gaze of someone of their own race. Previously, it's been assumed racial bias came from bad experiences with people of different races, but this research shows it could actually be the exact opposite. Racial bias later in life may arise from our lack of exposure to other race individuals in infancy, Dr. Lee explained. Infants will learn from people they are most exposed to. If babies aren't exposed to different races, they group racial groups together in their mind instead of viewing people as individuals who might be different colors. Infants by nature have negative reactions to unfamiliar things and people, Dr. Lee said via email. Lumping the other race individuals as a group makes it very easy for them to spread their negative reactions to all of them. So, with all this research proving even babies aren't colorblind, what's a parent to do? What parents can do is from early infancy, right after birth, expose your child to other race individuals in person or through media such as books. Interestingly, many parents by unconscious choice tend to show books depicting people of their own race, Dr. Lee suggested. So parents should overcome that and choose books worldly. Bottom line, introduce your little ones to people of a variety of races. With a diverse array of faces around them, there's less room for biases to develop. All right, so again, to reiterate, not saying that, babies are terrible, prejudiced, little creatures or anything like that, but just proving that, we tend to, as humans, form biases for and against things, from a very young age. And, it's interesting to think that, if I want to raise my kids in the best way possible, if I want them to become people who do not hold these unconscious biases and who are not more likely to be, unconsciously prejudiced towards people of other races, then they have to see them. It seems simple, but, they have to be exposed to different types of people. Otherwise, they may automatically have some negative stereotypes about types of people who they have not encountered before. So diversity is good for babies is our ultimate takeaway message, I guess, from that study. Now, I'm sure that you all, like myself, probably were not exposed to incredible amounts of diversity as a baby. So I'm almost positive, from my earliest childhood memories and from things my parents have told me that, I probably wasn't around a whole lot of people who were different, who had racial diversity and other types of diversity as a kid. So they've developed this test. This is through Harvard University. Implicit association test. It's the same general concept as the test they were having these babies take, where they were measuring bias through reaction time. The idea being that if we automatically associate, certain races as being better than others, as being preferred to others, our reaction time is quicker when trying to associate those races or those groups with something good. And, vice versa. We associate other as negative, and our reaction time trying to think of these other groups in a positive way would take longer, and that kind of shows our unconscious bias. So obviously, this is all unconscious, not trying to accuse anyone of bias or anything. I know you're all, wonderful people who would never consciously, behave in a prejudiced fashion. But I just thought that the experiment itself is interesting. And when you go to this website and you acknowledge possibilities of interpretations, there's a lot of different categories. So for many of you, maybe you don't have an unconscious bias based on race, or at least stereotypical race, but maybe you have unconscious biases based on religion or gender identity or disability. So there's a lot of different categories, and I just thought it was interesting the way that they develop these different tests. And, obviously, is it measuring what it's supposed to measure? You can decide the validity and the reliability of the test. But if nothing else, might be interesting to challenge your biases and see how easy or how difficult, coming up with an kind of unbiased score on this test is. I took 2 of these tests. I tried to choose ones that I thought I might have an unconscious bias about. And I will happily share my results with you if you are interested. But I just thought it was an interesting experiment to kind of see, the ways in which we might hold unintended, stereotypes or thoughts about certain groups of people. So anyways, I challenge you to approach it with an open mind, not in a critical or accusatory fashion. Just something to learn about yourself, perhaps, or to see how difficult it is to take these tests. I thought some of them were quite challenging. So, anyways, for your assignment, I just challenge you to take 2 of the tests, pick whichever 2 you are interested in, and just explain to me, which test you took, talk about your results, what were your expectations going into it? Did you think that you were going to lean one way or another? Were you correct in your thoughts? Was your expectation the reality? Just to kind of see, what's up with that. So, anyways, that is about it as far as things I think I need to explain. So, yeah, that's about all I got. And obviously, for the rest of the week, we'll focus primarily on getting into reading and working through vocabulary stuff.